Good morning. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Finance and Governance Committee meeting. It's February 11, 2020, and we'll have the city clerk take the roll, please.
Member Basua.
Here.
Member Perlow. Chair Flynn.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, February 4th.
Thank you very much. All rise for the pledge, please. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first we're going to start with the item B, which is public comments on items not on the agenda. And we have one speaker, Ray Blattel, please. Mr. Blattel.
Good morning. Thank you. I realize this is not the correct body to present this, but I can't be here at 2:30, so maybe you can pass this on to that committee. First, the good news. Recall that I'd asked the city to paint a red no parking strip at the corner of Caliente and Corto Trail, which the city did. However, it didn't stop the violations. The other day, I was just happened to be walking by and was able to flag down an officer and alert him to the violation. He asked who painted the strip, and I said the city did. Well, the officer, he checked it out. He said he checked it out, and he did. And he either posted a ticket or a warning on the violator's windshield. Either way, I got the job done. So, but I was wondering, what if I wouldn't happen to be just walking by to flag down the officer? So there's other streets that are marked as similar matter, so they need to enforce these laws. But anyway, thanks to Oxnard PD. The second item is I take my daughter to elementary school at Marshall Thurgood School two mornings a week, and noticed a young boy riding a bicycle without a helmet. He has a helmet. I know he's got a helmet because it's wrapped around his handlebars. I alerted the principal, but the solution didn't last. It's against the law, but above all, it's very dangerous to be riding a bicycle without a helmet. So maybe the police can perform a public safety assembly at schools to remind students that they should be wearing a helmet. I almost said something to the boy, but maybe the police can help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that appears to be all the speakers under public comment on items not on the agenda. And now we'll move to item C, consent agenda, and the approval of the minutes. What's the pleasure of the committee? Okay, we have a motion, Madam City Clerk, from Committee Member Perello, and a second from Committee Member Basua. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Now we'll go into item D under reports. And this is the Finance Department. The subject, fiscal year 2019-2020, budget mid-year review. The recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee, number one, receive an update on the latest fiscal year 2019-2020 revenue and expenditure projections for major funds, and authorize staff to make the presentation to City Council, incorporating any updates or new information that may arise in the interim. Number two, recommend that City Council approve for the Information Technology Fund 731, a budget appropriation request in the amount of $297,828.17 for repayment of a fiscal year 2020-2021 vendor cost. Number three, recommend that the City Council approve for the Golf Course Operating Fund 651 a full year revenue estimate of $4,259,666. And a full-year budget appropriation request in the amount of $4,136,638. And four, recommend that the City Council approve the Customer Billing Operations Fund 725, a budget appropriation request in the amount of $300,000 to reflect the current allocation of bank charges. And finally, number five, recommend that the City Council approve a resolution amending the position control resolution for information technology. And we'll have the CFO, Kevin Riper, give a presentation. Mr. Riper, good morning.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee.
Usually in our PowerPoint presentations, we have the recommendations at the end, and we do today, but we also have the recommendations at the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation because they serve as the table of contents for how I'm going to go through the mid-year review. So I'm going to start with a review on fiscal year 1920 revenues and expenditures for the general fund, the Measure O fund, the golf fund, and then the three enterprise funds, the three utility funds, water, wastewater, and environmental resources. Then I'll describe why we need a balance sheet appropriation for the Information Technology Fund, a repeat from something that the committee recommended and the council approved a year ago, to prepay some vendor costs that have to be paid by IT this fiscal year, but they don't apply until next fiscal year. It's for services to be rendered next fiscal year, so we need a special balance sheet appropriation for that. And then I'll talk about the long-promised gross appropriation of revenues and expenditures in the Golf Fund, now that American Golf Corporation is in the saddle and operating the golf course. We have a technical appropriation change to the Customer Billing Operations Fund due to bank charges and the way we allocate them and a more precise estimate of them that the City Treasurer's Department's come up with. And finally, the Chief Information Officer will describe a request for position control resolution amendment. Okay, on to the general fund, Fund 101. I've got two slides on this. The first one is on revenues, and the next one is on expenditures. So revenues. Per usual, we're going to start with fund balance. So the fund balance at the start of fiscal year 1920, as of July 1st, 2019, was $19.6 million in Fund 101, the general fund. Back in the spring of 2019, when we were projecting the ending balance for fiscal 19, meaning June 30th, 2019, the day before the start of the new fiscal year, our projection for this number was only $14.8 million. And the auditors touched on this a little bit in their presentation of the CAFR. The reason that we ended up at there are three main reasons why we ended up at $19.6 million starting fund balance instead of 14.8. Reason number one is sales tax came in even higher than we expected. The last 2 quarters of last fiscal year, sales tax was even stronger than HDL and the staff had forecast. HDL is our independent sales tax and, for that matter, property tax consultant. Second reason is there's about $1 million of carryover that was expected to be spent last fiscal year, but won't be spent until this fiscal year in that 19.6. And finally, and most importantly in terms of dollars, there were even greater vacancy savings in the general fund operating departments than had been projected last winter and spring. We couldn't fill positions fast enough to spend all of the council appropriation on salaries and benefits. So those three factors together drove this starting fund balance up to 19.6. Okay, now to the revenues. I mentioned HDL is our property tax consultant. There is no change in the revenue estimate for property tax because we don't have a forecast from HDL yet, so we're sticking to what we have right now. By the time we put the budget together and present that to you, we will have an updated forecast for this fiscal year and therefore for future fiscal years from HDL for property tax. Sales tax is up. The estimate for the current fiscal year for sales tax revenue in the general fund's up $1.25 million, and that's building off the higher base that I just described that happened in fiscal year 2018-19. Other notable categories, there's just two. In other revenue, there's a substantial increase from the budget estimate of $3.7 million. Right now we're looking at $5.2 million, or $1.5 million increase in $1.5 million increase in other revenue. That's all due to the one-time sale of Rule 20A undergrounding funds negotiated by the city manager's office and approved by council to the city of Laguna Beach. We got $1.8 million unbudgeted, unexpected payment that flows to the general fund. So that's why that number's up. But there's also, you can see there's also a big minus, a reduction in revenue estimate from $8.25 million to just $6.5 million for something called fees and charges. And this is due mostly to employees in the Public Works and Transportation Department not being able to charge as much of their time to capital improvement projects as the adopted budget originally assumed. And the main reason for that is those employees don't exist. As is highlighted in the staff report, the Public Works and Transportation Department and the HR Department were struggling as a city to hire enough enough civil engineers and project managers to execute the projects that are assumed in the adopted CIP. Well, if we can't hire those employees, they're not charging their time to the projects because they're not executing the projects. There isn't anyone to execute the projects. So we've taken down our revenue estimate substantially for charges from general fund employees to CIP projects. When we get to the expenditure side, in fact, I'll show you right now. When we get to the expenditure side, in Public Works, see this row labeled Public Works Construction and Design Services? That's where the CIP is executed. The budget assumed $2.9 million of spending. We dropped that by a third. Public Works Department and Finance Department think we're only going to spend $2 million, a reduction in expenditures of $900,000 because those employees that we had hoped to have on board executing CIP projects aren't on board, haven't been able to attract and retain enough employees. So a lot of that revenue shortfall is offset by an expenditure reduction. Okay, back to the revenue table. So those are the four main revenue points I wanted to make. In total, you can see at the bottom of the second column from the right, the total dollar changes were up just $1 million, 1.1 million in our total revenue estimate for the general fund, 139.4 in the budget to 140.5. And then that flows over into the next table, which is the expenditure table. So three more noteworthy items here in our projection of year-end expenditure versus what council appropriated in the budget. I already mentioned the Public Works and Construction and Design Services reduction of 0.9 million. We also reduced our estimate of non-departmental costs by 1.9 million. The biggest reason in there is we had a projected cost of general fund bargaining unit agreements, general fund labor cost increases, and it was all consolidated into this non-departmental line in the adopted budget document because we didn't know what the spread would be because labor negotiations had been completed when we did the budget. So that $750,000 or $800,000 has now been spread from non-departmental to all the departments in the general fund affected by labor contracts. So that's one reason why this is down. And the expected spending from the contingency is also down because we're halfway through the fiscal year. So half the time has elapsed for contingencies to occur, and we don't think we're going to spend the whole contingency. So that accounts for the significant majority of the reduction in spending in the reduction in projected spending for non-departmental. And then just below that is the Police Department. That's obviously the biggest part of the general fund, and it looks like the Police Department, a joint estimate between Finance and Police, about $400,000 below the adopted budget, 62.3 instead of 62.7. So all those positive numbers, these three here, help to reduce spending. They're partially offset by a projected excess of expenditures over appropriations in the Fire Department, which is due to overtime and station coverage. Grand total, we're looking at about $500,000 of total expenditures below the adopted budget. We're making a projection now, $142.4 million, adopted budget's $143. So you put the revenue of the previous slide, if you take our current estimate of $140.5 million of revenue, right there at the bottom, and then go to the total expenditure estimate of 142.4, that's a difference of $2 million, an operating deficit, if you will, of $2 million. Well, you subtract $2 million operating deficit from a $19.6 million available fund balance, and you get $17.6 million. That's our projection of ending fund balance at June 30th, 2020. And that equals just a shade over 12% of total expenditures plus transfers out, which is coincidentally right on top of the council policy of 12%. That's a lot of data. Before I move on to the Measure O fund, does the committee have questions about the general fund analysis I just went through?
Thank you very much for those, that presentation. Committee members have any questions? Committee Member Perillo?
When we can't find the employees for the Public Works, how is that going to hit us later on? What's the impact? It's going to be bump these expenses way,
That's a question for the Public Works Director.
or that to save it for later, or what? I mean, and just like make a comment, the pointer that you're using, I hope everybody uses that. At least for me, that you can at least follow it when the lights go out and you can highlight. It's almost like a machine gun sight in a World War II movie. Swear to God, it helps.
And good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Rosemarie Gaglione, Public Works Director. Yes, if we're slow in getting the bodies that we need, it may be that not all of the projects may be completed by the end of the fiscal year, and it also may be that we need to use more consultant help to get things done. So if things are critical, we'll just backfill that with consultants and keep moving forward. Of course, using consultants can be more expensive, so we try to balance that and use them with the right funding sources and not use them with others.
Okay, thank you very much.
Committee Member Sua, any questions? Mr. Riper, just a quick question. For all these departments, just when we look at the expenditures, does that include the both the $14 million in regular payments to CalSTRS and the $20 million of unfunded liability payments for a total of $34 million? Are those figures embedded in these departmental costs?
Yes, they are. The CalPERS figures and the unfunded accrued liability are all embedded in the salary and benefit costs in those figures, both in the adopted budget and in the second column are year-end estimates. Yes.
Thank you. And then Committee Member Basua does have a
Sorry,
question.
just a quick question. Under the fire department, that deficit of 2.3, are we expected to get any reimbursements from the state?
Yes.
So that should lower that amount, but
Yes.
not this fiscal year.
This fiscal year, Chief?
Well, it's hard to say,
Yeah.
but we're due 623,000 from the state or feds. Good morning. So what currently is outstanding from the federal reimbursements for our wildland responses is $623,000. When we will receive it, I have no idea. It's been trickling in over a period of 6 months, 8 months. So it may not even occur in this fiscal year.
Okay, with that, we're going to move to the Measure O fund. It's a simpler table. As usual, we start with fund balance. So when we published the budget last spring for fiscal year 1920, we were projecting that this number would be 11.9 million, and the beginning available fund balance is actually 12 million. So that projection actually turned out pretty close. Not much going on here compared with the adopted budget. A slight increase in sales tax revenue is expected, about 1.5% compared with what was in the budget because of the stronger economy. On the spending side, the noteworthy item is, well, it's spending less than appropriations kind of spread across all of the different categories, resulting in a year-end estimate of about 21.3 million compared with a budget assumption of 26.1. But the different departments responsible for the various Measure O programs and activities and employees think that they will probably carry over to next fiscal year about $3.1 million of spending that council appropriated this year. So you take the projected expenditures of 17.2, subtract projected revenue of 17.2, subtract 21.3 of expenditures, that's a $4.1 million, quote, operating deficit, unquote. Wow. Add to that another 3.1 million of carryover that'll probably be spent next fiscal year. That's 7.2 million reduction to fund balance. So a $7.2 million reduction to a $12 million fund balance at the beginning of the year equals a 4.8 million projected ending fund balance for the Measure O fund for 104. And Deputy City Manager Shiri Klima is always reminding me to point out, over the long term, there needs to be some money saved in Measure O Fund, Fund 104 fund balance, because that fund is committed to pay debt service for the fire station and a couple other things beyond the projected life, beyond the scheduled ending life of Measure O in March of 2029. So there's a little, I didn't put the asterisk on there, but I made a note to say that here. That's the Measure O picture. Are there questions about that before I move on to the 3 utility enterprise funds?
Any questions? Committee Member Perillo.
I appreciate how you handed out that the expenditures of Measure O are more than what the intake of Measure O in the staff report. Historically, that's what it's been, when we've decided to spend it. Thank you.
And I believe you'll be seeing a more detailed presentation on that from Ms. Klima 2 weeks from today. Okay, let's go to the 3 utility enterprise funds. Water fund. Not a lot going on here compared with budget. Revenue from fees and charges is projected to be down about $1.25 million from what we assumed in the budget, and that's because of lower sales of recycled water. Total expenditures projected substantially below budget, and that's due to a couple of things. That's due in great part to the problems I described earlier in attracting and retaining enough CIP project managers and civil engineers to do the capital outlay. So Finance and Public Works have cut in half our estimate of how much capital outlay will occur this fiscal year. So as a result, substantially lower expenditures and a much higher available fund balance projected at the end of this fiscal year than we were projecting in the adopted budget. But much of that will be spent later on capital outlay, and also this figure includes a lot of restricted funds, AB 1600 development impact fees. You can't spend all of this on just any old operation. That's wastewater. Excuse me, that's water. On to wastewater.
Yes, question on...
Yeah, question on water. Yes, sir.
Is there anything that we're not going to be able to address because we don't have the staff that's urgent, that needs to be addressed ASAP?
Again, I'm going to defer to Ms. Gaglione.
No,
Okay,
we'll be fine.
okay, thank you.
Okay, wastewater fund. A more significant change in the revenue estimate here for the wastewater fund. We're significantly increasing our fees and charges, our revenue estimate for wastewater by about $3 million, or 7%. And that's due to 2 factors that have happened in the first half of the fiscal year. One, there were some one-time connection fees that weren't budgeted that came in. And second, there's been greater consumption in the wastewater fund than was originally projected. So a substantial increase, not enormous, but a substantial increase in projected revenue. Not a lot going on the expenditure side, 69 versus 71 million. Projected annual operating surplus of about 4.5 million, building to a fund balance in excess of the 25% target. But again, this fund balance number includes a number of restricted funds. There's $10 million of AB 1600 development impact fees in this number that can only be spent on growth-related CIP projects, can't be spent for operations. So when we bring the 2021 budget to you in the spring, we'll parse this a little more finely so you have a better sense of what's spendable on operations and what has to be devoted to specific capital projects. Going to Environmental Resources Fund.
Question.
Yeah, question, yes, sir.
With respect to the restricted money that has to be spent from developer fees, is there a timeline? It has to be spent by a certain date? I think
Yes, there is, and that's a city attorney question.
So yes, we need to program these things and get that money spent, properly account for it, and I can give you further information later if you want.
We're on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something we pay attention to, and it's this, as you're hearing, it's kind of a complicated system whereby we have to make sure that we have the ability to do that programming and make sure that we have the personnel in place, or if need be, the consultants available to enable us to use those funds within those proper timelines and accounting periods.
Thank you.
On to the third and final, Utility Enterprise Funds, Environmental Resources Fund. Really not much different from the budget here. Not much different in the mid-year review projections than from the adopted budget. But I do want to highlight the next one, the Golf Fund, where things are very different. You may recall that back in June, when you considered the American Golf Corporation Golf Course Operating Project, that we alerted Council to the fact that for the first time in several decades, we were going to be able to estimate and appropriate gross revenues and gross expenditures of the Golf Fund, as opposed to the past, where we had an operating contract where the only thing we appropriated was the city-paid costs, and we didn't appropriate and didn't run through our books the revenues and expenditures of the golf course operator. But the American Golf Corporation contract changed all that. So part of the action later is asking you to recommend full council appropriate gross revenues and gross expenditures of American Golf Course to the Golf Course Operating Fund. But there's a bigger story here that I want to highlight for the committee. So the Golf Fund started, this is Fund 651, okay, this is its own fund. The golf course started the year with $1.5 million of fund balance. Between American Golf Corporation bringing in $4.3 million and golf course development fees of $750,000, the golf course fund should have about $5 million, a little over $5 million of revenue this year. And that just about equals total golf course related expenditures. American Golf itself, under their contract, will spend 4.1, and then the golf course will spend another $1 million on things like utility costs, some utility costs, staff costs, landfill monitoring, a whole capital outlay that's not the responsibility of American Golf, but it's the responsibility of the city. And then there's the repayment to the water fund, or the loan that the water fund made to the golf course fund years ago. That all adds up to $1 million. So we've got a roughly balance between revenues and expenditures for this fiscal year, leaving a projected year-end balance of 1.3. So on the surface, you say, wow, that's great. The golf course does not require a general fund operating subsidy like it did in the past. There's no general fund operating subsidy for this year. But the thing to watch longer term is this other revenue, golf course development fees, will not last forever. There's at least another year, maybe two, of revenue coming from that. The staff prediction is that it's just the first year for American Golf Corporation, and by the time they get fully in the saddle and all their programs are in place, that this number will grow such that it can cover in future not just American Golf Corporation's costs, but the $1 million of city-paid costs. So more to come on the Golf Fund in the next couple of years. Any questions about that before I move to the specific recommendations, the remaining 4 specific recommendations, which won't take very long?
Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to say this. We're talking about the golf course. I'd bring this to everybody that's here. The Ventura Regional Sanitation District owns golf courses, owns the property on the other side of Victoria. There was a fire, and the fire over the closed landfill ended up costing $1.2 million. The reason is it burnt up the gas collection pipes. We have gas collection pipes on this side of Victoria that my understanding is because we've leased the property from the VRSD, we're responsible for that. There is a discussion at the Ventura Regional Sanitation District to notify the fire departments about the expensive assets that are sitting on top of these closed landfills, basically the gas collection system, and what the liability is when they get burnt up and the gas escapes into the environment. So the $1.2 million cost came as a big surprise. It's not reimbursable by FEMA because FEMA didn't declare it a major, huge area that FEMA's going to cover the big ticket. I just want to let us know about that. They have machinery that can trim around the pipes. I hope we consider that, because if we get a fire on this side and the brush is still there to burn, we could have one big expense that would be attributable, I think, to the golf course. because the city has taken, with their agreement, all liabilities over that landfill, including the gas collection. Just wanted to add that, however you guys digest it. Thank you.
Okay, on to the remaining 4 recommendations. That was the first recommendation. That was the summary of the general fund and the other major funds. Okay, there's 4 more. I mentioned at the top of the show a special balance sheet appropriation for the IT fund. Y'all saw this last spring and recommended to the full council. The business model of the tech world is you got to prepay your license costs. Well, so the IT department's either has in hand or will get almost $300,000 worth of invoices that they have to pay this fiscal year, but they're not applicable until services delivered next fiscal year. So we didn't put that in the current year budget appropriation, or the general fund would have been stressed even, the IT fund would have been stressed even more than it already was. The general fund pays like 4/5 of the IT fund. So we need a balance sheet appropriation to exchange cash for prepaid assets by prepaying this $300,000 to vendors. It's something we did last year, and the recommendation is we do it again this year. So there's a special balance sheet appropriation budget adjustment request in your packet. Third recommendation, golf course operating fund. I explained that we now have the chance to appropriate revenues and expenditures gross rather than net in the golf course fund. And so that's also reflected in the attachments in the request for budget appropriation. Fourth recommendation. The City Treasurer's Department has done a more precise allocation of bank charges, and most of bank charges are incurred for what's called the interchange fee, the Visa and the MasterCard charges for when businesses, residents, anybody pays us for water, environmental resources, or wastewater services. And that allows the finance department to do a more precise allocation of those bank charges to various funds. And so, since most of the interchange fees, most of the Visa and the MasterCard bank fees are paid by utility customers, we need a $300,000 appropriation for that in the internal service fund the City Treasurer's Department operates, which is Fund 725, customer billing. The cost of all that will be picked up by the 3 enterprise funds. And the fifth and final recommendation is not mine. CIO Keith Brooks will take that.
Morning, Chair and Council. Keith Brooks, Chief Information Officer for the City of Oxnard. There are 2 position reclassifications included, the first of which is for a GIS coordinator to be reclassified as a systems administrator. Both HR and IT have analyzed the requirements for that position, and it more aligns with systems administrator, so it's more of administrative change on our part. The second one is for reclassification for a technology project manager position we've been attempting to recruit for the ERP project, funded by that project also. We've been out to recruitment at the current level and weren't successful getting many with our low unemployment and high-tech demand for jobs right now, so HR recommended that we reclassify that one as systems administrator also to widen the net a little bit. If you have any questions? Okay.
Do we offer anything like, and I'm going to relate it to what I am aware of, the wastewater department had opportunities for students to work and sort of like learn, sort of tag along. I'm not really a full tilt apprentice, but something like that. Do we offer anything like that? There's got to be
Yes.
skilled people in the community that would like to get their foot in the door.
Yeah, and that's the same tactic I've been taking for the last few years. I worked for about a year solid with the Community College District for Ventura County, and from that established one MOU with Oxnard College with our technology department, and we have since had, I think we are at 19 interns over the past 3 years that we bring in, one more coming in this fall, a couple of which we've been able to offer jobs to. Now those are recruiting at the entry level with people with potential, and they come in, they get credit, they do it for free, they don't get paid, just credit, and then they later are able, if they have enough experience, to apply for the entry level both of these positions are recruiting at the upper end, not at the entry level.
Okay.
So that doesn't help in this scenario, but we're pushing on that entry level. If we can bring people in, then that's a better opportunity for us in this market.
I was not aware of that, Mr. Brooks, and I appreciate that. And it's a compliment and a feather in the hat in the city of Oxnard, and I hope we start advertising that because it makes us look good. It's going to help somebody get a kick in the pants.
It's been good.
To get their foot in the door somewhere. Thank you very much. I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, very well. We do have some speakers, and what I'd like to do is call those speakers up now. And let's see, Jim Lavery to be followed by Ray Blattel, please. Pardon me? Oh, he did. I'm sorry. Mr. Blattel, I didn't know which one was first. Okay. It's not a long wait. Okay.
Thank you. My concern here is the way the Golf Operating Fund is reported. In the agenda report on page 15, under revenues relative to fees and charges, this item was listed as $0.1 million in the revised budget of November 2019. Yet, the FY 19-20 year-end estimate is $4.3 million. Why this big difference? Also on page 15, the line item golf course AGC year-end expenditures estimate is $4.1 million, while the November 2019 revised budget for this line item was $0. And the line item River Ridge Golf Course from the November 2019 revised expenditure budget was $0.1 million, and the year-end estimate is $1.1 million. What's the difference between these two line items? Relative to the request for a budget appropriation expenditures transfers out, Element Professional Contractual is $3,251,828. I think this needs some elaboration. These values need to be completely traceable to the values and elements listed in the annual plan contained in the agreement A8157 with AGC. The same can be said for Element Other Services for $101,165. What is this expenditure for? Furthermore, Element Utility Expenses Electricity for $251,425 is nearly twice the power and natural gas element listed in the annual plan, and the item in telephone service is over 3 times the amount listed in the annual plan. This is quite a discrepancy. Rather than year-end estimates or guesses, wouldn't it be interesting to see how much money to date per month was supplied by AGC to the owner account, the city, and how much money to date per month has been distributed to AGC from the operating account? Without these data points and a quality curve fit program, one cannot accurately predict what the year-end points could be. In my opinion, it is awfully presumptuous to assume the year-end point expenditures and revenues. What you're seeing here are the year-end predictions. What I'd like to see is the actual performance of these accounts since the inception of this agreement. That is, what was actually coming in the form of revenue and what has been actually dispersed from the operating account as working capital. Given this data, one could more accurately predict what the eventual outcome might be. I'd be willing to bet that none of you fully understand this information any better than I do. Thank you.
Mr. Riper.
So on the big difference between the, let's go to the golf fund table. On the big difference between the revised budget and the year-end estimate, we tried to explain in the spring during the budget presentation and then again on June 18th when City Council considered the American Golf contract. None of the American Golf contract information was known when the 1920 budget was put together. That didn't come together until the 1920 budget had been published and distributed. So the only choice we had, because we didn't know who that contract was going to go to or what it would look like. So the only choice we had was to follow the practice of the last couple decades and appropriate only the city costs and the net city revenue, which is mostly development impact fee. And we said at the time that we would come back to you, which is today, with the full year estimates once Public Works and Finance had sat down with American Golf. And that's why the columns here are so big. I think Mr. Blattel mentioned that I think he might have misread the River Ridge Golf Course projection as $0.1 million, but it's actually a 1.0. Well, I should have put a 0.0 there. So there's almost no difference between the city-paid cost estimates in the budget and the year-end projection. His second point, all the actuals to date are indeed taken into account in the year-end projections that Finance, Public Works, and American Golf have made. We just didn't publish all of them, so if we did that for every fund, this would be an even longer presentation. But we're happy to share that information with anyone who's interested.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lavery, please.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I wanted to talk about the discrepancy in the funding, year-end fund balance of 14.8, the one that was forecast, and the actual amount of 19.6 million. Now, I spoke to Mr. Riper about this ahead of time. That's a $5 million difference. He said they put the budget together in March. That's, to me, that's a significant, error in forecasting. And a lot of things could have been avoided, to me, if you had the better information. For example, Fire Station number 4, to close that. That decision probably could have been delayed at least for a year if they had better information. Maybe all those people you laid off could have kept their jobs for another year if you had better forecasting. So it's a little difficult for me to believe for March, or why weren't they updating in April and May the numbers so you'd have a really better picture of what fund balance you were going to have. So I think those employees should have been kept on for a year. That's my opinion. Or Fire Station number 4 shouldn't have come up at all if they had better numbers. And I think you deserve better than what they gave you. That's what I'm saying. And I did talk to Mr. Riper about this. Now, this begs another question about all the vacancies. Now, you already have millions of dollars of salary savings built into the budget. This is telling me there's 3 or 4 million more in vacancies. So how many vacancies are there in the city? 50, 60 in the general fund? More? So what work is not getting done? So again, makes the decision to lay off people seem ridiculous to me when you have all these other vacancies anyway and you're not spending the money. So you need to know this. And I didn't like the answer the Public Works Director gave. He said, everything's getting done that needs to get done, but the numbers show all these savings. You can't have it both ways. You can't not spend the money and get the same things done. So either the work is getting done and it's not being reflected in the numbers, or it's not getting done and is being reflected in the numbers. You can't have it both ways. And again, what's missing from this report is the big picture. What's going to happen next year? There's no sense of what's going to happen next year. What are you going to do with all the stuff that was pushed into Measure O that caused such a massive deficit in Measure O? Like, weren't there things moved in there, like Station 4 cost, City Core, Police Academy? What's going to happen to all that next year? So your general fund balance that he showed, that Mr. Riper showed, is way overestimated because of all that stuff that's been moved into the Measure O fund. So none of that. You need at least next year's picture. How are the operating departments going to know how to fill out their budget request if they don't know where the city is next year? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Riper.
Let me start with Mr. Lavery's last point, which is a long-term forecast is absolutely crucial to what city council decisions are going to, what the city manager is going to recommend, and what city council decisions will be faced for the next budget. That comes as part of the fiscal year 2021 budget process. Now that we have a solid base, as solid as we can make it for current fiscal year, we can build off that projections of expenditures and revenues for next fiscal year, and that'll be coming to you as part of the to you and the public as part of the budget process. Mr. Lavery also commented on the $14.8 million versus a $19.6 million fund balance. So it's important to remember that operating results are the small difference between two very large numbers. General fund revenue last fiscal year was $138 million. So our ending balance projection in the spring, when the 1920 budget was put together, was $4.8 million lower than what the CAFR eventually reported. That's a little over 3% of general fund revenues. Would we like to have been closer? Yes. Hindsight's always 20/20. We're not perfect forecasters. We make the best assumptions that we can, and then things happen in the real world that you cannot project with certainty. And staffing levels and ability to attract and retain employees, which Mr. Lavery is right, significant salary savings, significant vacancy savings above and beyond what we projected last spring, those happen. But when HR is out recruiting a bunch of employees, it's very difficult to predict how many employees you're going to get and how many you're not. So that's why we try to learn from the forecast variances, but I'm not going to apologize for a forecast that was 3% off in the spring of 2019.
Thank you very much. Yes, Committee Member Perillo.
Is there some other model or some other help or something that could help you in your process? 3%, I'd kill for 3%. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. Jesus Christ. Is there something that we can help you with or you haven't asked for that would help? Or is it just that's how projections work?
We have a very experienced budget office. It's supplemented by a long-term budget forecast put together by a former finance director who has experience in multiple states. That's kind of an independent check. And then for the two big general fund revenue sources, property tax and sales tax, we have one of the two top sales and property tax consulting firms in the state, and that's HDL, who help us with the forecast, as I mentioned at the very beginning. So I think we have enough help. It's just that not all of these things can be predicted with perfect accuracy. And the part about personnel, I challenge anybody to predict the labor market and who the city's going to be able to hire, attract, and retain, and then who they're going to lose. That's pretty tough to do.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, I appreciate the public that comes up and asks these questions because, Mr. Blattell, I would have lost the bet that you mentioned. I would have lost it if you'd asked me those questions. And I know I put my head in a chopping block by saying that here publicly. But I appreciate the questions that you guys ask. But I more, from having been involved in this for a few years now, I appreciate the straightforward answers that I hear from staff. You have no idea, Mr. Riper, how big of a difference you've made in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Riper, I think what maybe is even a more significant question, and again, I agree with about the 3%, and I was almost thinking about, rephrasing Committee Member Perillo's question, that obviously 3% or being within 3% is a good prediction. And can you have perfection every once in a while? But I don't think anything's absolutely perfect. But I think a more relevant question is this past fiscal year we had to cut. It was recommended we cut $9 million, so it was a $9 million shortfall. We were only able to stomach 6 out of the $9 million in requested cuts. But if all factors remain constant, which oftentimes isn't the case, but if all factors were to remain constant when we look at revenues, anticipated general fund revenues and expenditures, because I think he had asked the question, it would appear that we wouldn't have potentially as many cuts. I mean, nobody can absolutely predict that, but how would you talk about that, address that?
The budget called for drawing on general fund reserves by $3.6 million, and the current projection is $2.0 million.
Okay.
And then the forecast that you're going to see as we put together the long-term forecast still shows a structural deficit for a few years.
And then with the, just as a quick question, I know the unfunded liability portion of the budget, I mean, I'm just off the top of my head, this past or current fiscal year, I believe it was $20 million, and then the regular payments were $14 million, for a total of $34 million to CalSTRS. But that unfunded liability payment is going up about $2 million every year. So, and that can fluctuate too. Is that, I mean, that's certainly part of this structural deficit that we have, but could you comment on that?
Yes, it's part of the structural deficit. It was incorporated in the 5-year projection you saw last spring, and it'll be incorporated in the 5-year projection you see this spring.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is if we look at the last 2 or 3 fiscal years, that unfunded liability has gone from, I'm just off the top of my head, from 16 or 15 million up to 20 million. Is that more or less, are we still along that same trajectory where it's going up a couple $1 million a year? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Yes, we still are. The trajectory hasn't changed substantially.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes the questions. And are there any other comments? Committee Member Basua.
Thank you. I want to thank speakers today. Great questions, Mr. Labria and Mr. Blatel. One thing, though, I do have a comment in regards to the IT. If we know that we are going to have to pay these installments in advance, I would rather have it be added to the budget as a whole instead of coming back to mid-year review. Like you said, Mr. Riper, this is the second time. So, you know, I would like to see it when we start getting ready for the 2021 budget in there, even though I know it's going to, you know, it's kind of, again, projections. You know, I would rather it be projected and then not coming back, because I'm kind of really wanting to stick to these numbers that I'm seeing up here. I mean, great job. I mean, we were going to do a net annual of 3.6 million. Now we're at 2.0. And that's what I really call moving forward, even though it's not as we want to see it, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Can I respond or just point something out to the committee? The prepaid thing is a tough call. In an ideal world where you had sufficient resources, you would definitely include in the budget enough to prepay. But the fiscal reality is if we'd included the $300,000 for IT, this number would have been $3,850,000. And you would have had to dig either deeper into reserves or make another $250,000 of cuts in the budget that was presented. My thought was, for a service that isn't going to be delivered until the next fiscal year, why cut this fiscal year's budget? It leads to this really kludgy balance sheet appropriation. No dispute about that. And I've had this argument, and it's been an argument with the CIO for a full year. It's a tough trade-off, but I appreciate the feedback, and the city manager and I will take that into account in putting together the 2021 budget.
Any further questions? Committee Member Perillo.
Just a comment. Number one, on page 7 of the staff report, second to the last paragraph, it starts out, the technology industry has adopted a financial model whereby customers like the city pay software license and usage fees in advance. I'm used to, I guess you would say, from working, you get paid after you provide the work. I'm used to paying for my groceries before I eat them, but I pay for them when I collect them. How did the technology industry get into the position where they can call the shots that you pay before you even get it? Can somebody answer that? Or is it negotiated? I mean, the city could actually negotiate it and pay when they use it.
Yeah, we have a lot of contracts that are on a yearly basis. Say, for example, with Microsoft, they give us the bill for the full year and we pay it. In that example, it's a 3-year contract and we pay 1/3 1 year. We don't actually get the services of those licenses in advance. We use them throughout the year.
Okay.
And that's the way it's structured.
Okay. If there was a problem, like one company were to buy somebody else, do we make sure, I mean, I'm sure that you do.
Yeah.
How do we cover our back that we make sure we get what we're supposed to get?
Well, the contract covers our back, and legal can attest to that. And if we know there's an issue, we can negotiate for a quarterly or monthly contract with companies if they're willing to offer that to us. And we do that with some of our more fluid contracts, but the majority of them, licensing and agreement, Google, Microsoft, you pay for the full year when the invoice comes in.
Okay.
Just same thing with our ERP systems. You pay when the invoice comes in for the entire year. And then you have clauses for getting out of that liability throughout the year if either of you should decide to cancel your portion of the contract. But usually we don't have to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brook, for your explanation.
Okay.
The second comment that I have, and it's not with IT, it has to do with the financing. I have requested on a meeting coming up in Public Works about the cost that the city will incur with respect to their portion of the commitment for the completion of the SCR3 levy. Is there any accounting for what those costs will be in any funds? I've spoken to the city manager about this. I'm not sure. But we have a lot of people a little bit goosey about how this is going to work out to make sure that the money is in place. The county and the city will be working on completing the SCR Levy 3. There will be something coming forward And is there money because a previous city manager, Mr. Nyhoff, had committed that the city had put money aside, and it turned out apparently we didn't. So what is the plan?
So, Councilmember Perrello, right now, there were monies that were paid by the Wagon Wheel Development, that those monies were promised to go towards the levy. The city has joined with the county in applying for grants, but at this time, the city hasn't formally committed to put extra money toward the levy. The county actually charges a tax increment towards these sorts of improvements.
Okay.
And so that really, in my opinion, should be theirs to fund. So we haven't, it's, no matter what someone may have promised in the past, I don't believe it's ever come to the council to say that we're going to put forth $1 million or $2 million toward the levy.
Okay, I needed to ask that. Thank you very much.
And while I'm here, if you might indulge me, I just wanted to respond to the gentleman where I said we'd be fine rather quickly. The priority projects are going to be completed with no problem. So when you're looking at all the things that were really important, roofing and road work and other things, and all of that is being done. If projects weren't able to be completed, those would be the projects of lesser importance. Remember, we had the priorities 1, 2, and 3. So we make sure that we protect the asset, we don't lose money, we don't lose grant funding. And so we would prioritize in that manner.
So if there was a position that needed to be filled and it wasn't filled and the project was waiting because the position wasn't filled, that's when you had mentioned earlier you would get a consultant to fill that position?
That's correct.
Thank
We would
you.
get a consultant to reprioritize the work so that we make sure that those priority 1 projects are looked at.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I got.
Thank you very much, and I won't read the recommended items again. What's the pleasure of the committee on the item? Okay. Madam City Clerk, we have a motion by Committee Member Perrello and a second by Committee Member Basua. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It carries 3-0. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to the final item, which is under the Finance Department. Item 2, subject, preview of the city's online financial transparency portal. Recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee receive a preview of and provide feedback on and authorize staff to present to the City Council regarding the City of Oxnard's online financial transparency portal. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Flynn and committee members. I'm going to introduce this topic, but Jim Costello is going to do the presentation. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background on what you're going to see here. 2 to 3 years ago, the Finance Department embarked on a project to implement a tool called OpenGov. OpenGov is a platform that many cities use to provide easy access to the city's financial information to the public. It's a platform, web-based. We spent, like I said, 2 to 3 years. The heavy lifting of this really was started with the budget division, led by Beth Vo, to translate all of our financial system data into this tool. But lack of resources and competing priorities really stalled the effort and why it took so long. Last year in the budget process, you may remember that the council approved 2 new full-time resources for the finance department. One of them was the senior manager of internal control position, which you heard about last time when we talked about the corrective action plan. The second position was financial analyst 2 position, which Jim Costello filled for us in this fiscal year. And his role is really focused on providing, developing and maintaining monthly financial reporting, as well as developing and maintaining cost allocation plan for the city. So this topic is on the latter, the financial reporting process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who is going to give you a live demo of the platform that we have developed, and would like to get your feedback. We're expecting to, if based on the feedback from the committee, go forward to City Council in March and hopefully be able to launch this product by the end of the first quarter of this year. Thank you.
Mayor, I have just one question. There is no staff report on this item, correct? There is nothing. Okay, thank you.
Council
There's
member,
a
there's a
staff
very
report.
short staff report, but the majority of the information will be presented just on the portal.
Thank you.
Good morning, committee members. It's on? Good morning. As Donna mentioned, my name is Jim Costello. I've been working on this financial transparency portal for the city of Oxnard. What it's eventually going to do is be integrated into the city's website so that when residents or interested parties want to get financial information, they can pull it up on our city's website and then go into this portal and get all the information that they need. The portal is essentially made up of two components, one of which they call stories, which is like a web page. It provides a story, it has information on it, and the other are a series of interactive charts that is pretty impressive when you look at it. It gives you the ability to drill down and look at information. So our purpose here today is to give an overview and introduction. So this would be what the residents see when they pull up the first page. It talks about basically our commitment to financial transparency. We start off with some big picture items about revenues and expenses for all funds. That is, all funds with the exception of fiduciary funds over the last 5 years. And I'll get back and go into the charts and their capabilities in a little bit. We wanted to make this, in addition to just presenting data, also kind of a learning tool for people who might not be familiar with financial terminology and the way fund accounting works in cities. And so we've provided, some information on sources of revenues, types of expenses, how funds work. A little bit, you may recognize some of these graphics from previous presentations about, again, going back to the revenue side of things. So what we have are 5 story pages, which is, or 6 actually, the financial story page, and then we have a story page on our general fund, Measure O specifically, special districts, our utility funds, and then finally, cash balance by fund. So one of the things that the city's required to do is to report monthly on our revenues, our expenses, and our cash fund balances. And so hopefully this will work with that. So going to the charts, one thing you'll notice is the charts are broken down in sections. We can look over here by expenses. As you mouse over each of the expense items in the bar chart, it will show you this is your personnel expenses, this is your O&M expenses, fixed charges, and so forth. When you click on a chart, though, it brings you into the chart portal. And what this does is basically it first brings up the same information. The user has the opportunity to view the chart in whichever format they're comfortable with. If they're comfortable with line graphs, bar graphs, they have their options there. Again, the same thing. You can hover over each area of the chart to get up-to-date information on, in this case, again, these are expenses. The data is presented in tabular form beneath the chart, so all the data that's presented up above is presented down below. You can click into one section and it will drill down. It brings, like we're looking at personnel expenses. It brings up direct labor, the PERS, employee benefits. It should have overtime in there. And also, when you're looking in charts, every chart will have this option. What we've tried to do is identify certain questions that the public would be interested in, and so we've come up with charts for those. So this is the annual chart for all funds. We have a monthly chart. We have one for Measure O, special districts, cash balances, and utility funds, and I'll get into those later. And you can look up pre-selected items. We're looking at expenses right now. You can look at a chart of revenue versus expenses just by clicking on a button. you can look at, half-cent sales tax revenues. Again, this chart is over years. But there's also an option that people can click on filters. So right now, we're looking at revenues. You have your option. You can look at revenues, expenses, revenues versus expenses. You can filter it by fund. You can see, all funds if you want. Certain funds, you can filter it by department if you only want to see revenues and expenses related to one department. So it has a lot of option, a lot of flexibility for people to go in there and kind of slice and dice the data and look at it whichever way they want to. Back up here. So we go into more detail down here on our general fund. At the top again, we have a description of what the general fund is, how it works. Again, we have general fund balances over time. Again, you can click into this and it'll bring you back into the chart portal. If you wanted to see, again, filters, you can filter that any way you want. If you only want to look at general fund expenses and you want to see by department, say what are the fire department expenses? You click on that, it brings those up. Again, on each of these charts, you have drill down capabilities. And again, all the data is provided in tabular form underneath the charts. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Sorry, that's Mr. Riper's presentation. I hit the wrong button. Okay, this chart just kind of shows on a monthly basis or a year-to-date basis what our expenses are for the general fund. So of a total budget of $142 million, this is updated through December. Now we've spent $61 million. A similar story page on Measure O, explaining what Measure O is, what types of programs are supported by Measure O. We have Measure O spending. This is a year-to-date chart. Again, you can click on the chart. And the same options as with any of the charts. You have the option of filtering it by expenses, by department. On Measure O in particular, though, what this will drill down to is the chart of accounts to the account level. So you can see what department is spending, what the types of charges are, but in the case of Measure O, this doesn't exactly show you what projects are being funded by Measure O. So for that, we relate back to our list of Measure O projects that were culled from the current year's budget. Just an explanation there. We go into special districts. We have a description of what the special districts are. These are your landscaping districts, your Mello-Roos districts, how they work in terms of the assessments and the services they get. We've included a map of the assessment districts within the city. And then again, we have monthly expenses related to the districts. Again, as in all the charts, you can go in and filter by department, by activity. So we look at community facilities districts. If you know what your district is, you can click on it and see, exactly what the expenses are, what's being spent on it each month. So there's a lot of information out there. Similar chart for utilities funds. We have a description of how the enterprise funds work, some of the requirements, how they operate, similar to a business. And then we have, again, year-to-date monthly revenue and expenses. This is for all utility funds. We have each fund broken out. We have the water revenue and expenses, we have wastewater, and we have environmental resources. And then finally, what we have is cash balances by fund. This is all funds, again, except for the fiduciary funds. So it wouldn't have like your retirement funds and certain trust funds that really are not city money, but this is cash balances of all the funds. You can click into it and see, again, if you want to see any particular fund balance, you go into filters. I know a lot of people are interested in general funds, so we'll filter by, where's general government? General fund cash balance for each month of the year. We see it springs up in December. That's when our property taxes are posted to the fund. So again, there's just a lot of information out there. It's information that I think the public has been requesting, and it's something that the city should want to do in terms of being transparent with the public on our finances. So that's a quick walkthrough of what the portal looks like. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
And just before we take questions, I also wanted to give credit where credit is due. Jim did a lot of work, obviously, on developing this, but we also got a lot of help from Katie Casey, our communications manager, in helping us in writing the stories and the visual graphics and pictures. We also got a lot of feedback from city manager's office and city attorney's office and public works. So it was a very collaborative effort to try to pull all of this together. So happy to take your questions and feedback.
Thank you very much. Committee members, Committee Member Perillo.
I appreciate the work. There are a lot of people who have been asking for information. Maybe just one question. With current information, and you gave an example, and it had to do with up to December. How many months of a delay or a lag is the information that we see? And is it consistent across the board?
Yes, the information will be updated monthly as soon as the financial system closes, as soon as we have an accounting close for that month. I'd say within a day of that happening, we can have all the information updated.
Consistent across all departments?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Council member, just to add to that, the closing I think is important. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes finance some time, and sometimes some of the additional reconciliations take some time as well.
Yeah, typically we close the month about the middle of the following month. So right around the 15th of the month is usually what we target for the prior month's close. So it's a 2-week or so delay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank you for the hard work and the visualization of the city's finances. I think anytime we could take quantitative information and visualize that, it's just a real plus. I really think that, and I could say this to our city manager and obviously the communications director and the staff, that I think the more we can get this out to the public, I think we have a vehicle, a tool to better explain the city's finances to members of the public. And I think if we were to kind of think about maybe some mini either podcast or just could be 1-minute segments on a YouTube channel, and then that's distributed out either through social media and a variety of other means, I think it would be really effective, because what we have seen here is we have seen individuals with political objectives that have attempted to monopolize quote unquote, the truth about the city's finances, and they're totally inaccurate. And this information is accurate, and I feel it's important that we get the truthful side of the city's finances out, and now I think we have the vehicle to do that. So anything that we can do, I will work with the city manager, work with anyone to, I just think 1-minute segments, 2-minute segments on YouTube, and then getting that on social media. We could talk about various aspects of the budget. We could talk, today we're going to be talking about, the general fund, and then we explain again what the general fund is. Most people don't know what the general fund is. And then talking about the utilities and constantly informing and bringing the public up to date about our finances. And I'll start by saying I served many years on the city council with a city councilman. His name is Dean Mulhart. And when I asked him once, I've said this before, when he was running for re-election, what's your goals? What projects do you have and what objectives do you have for running for re-election? And his response to me was, I've always wanted to try to get the financial story about the city's finances out to the public as a main objective. And I wish you were here to actually see this. I don't know, Dean, if you're watching, but this is an amazing tool to do exactly that. So thank you very much.
I just want to say one of the things I've been thinking of as I was working on this project is, first of all, it's information that should be out there for the public. And secondly, it's either going to answer a lot of questions for a lot of people, or it's going to generate a lot of questions from a lot of people. But either way, I think that dialogue is good to have, and the information should be available.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Perillo?
I appreciate your last comments there, but I can speak only for myself, but I cannot imagine that the other 6 council members do not experience the same thing I do. You come across people, whether in a store or at a neighborhood council meeting, that are extremely sharp. Extremely sharp. They have a lot to offer, but they won't engage here. They will not come to city council. They won't engage, but they watch. And the more information they can have, the more information they can feed to an elected official to get the questions. And you're right. More information does generate more questions, and it gets to the bottom. It's like being sick. You got to figure out what's wrong, and then you take care of it. Thank you. Thank you for the work.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation is that we forward this on to the City Council, and we have a motion to do so. So, Madam City Clerk, the motion was made by Committee Member Basua and a second by Committee Member Perillo. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, it carries 3-0, and that is the last item. And unless there are any items for future agendas.
Mayor,
Yes.
I just wanted to point out we were scheduled to have a presentation by the internal auditor today. He is ready with the whistleblower update and also with the ER cash handling audit, but because these items were important and we didn't think that we could fit that all into one meeting, we're pushing that back to March. So you will hear from the internal auditor about these as well as the overtime audit in March.
Thank you very much. And with no further items, this meeting is adjourned.
Wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day.